The great thing about a 24-hour storage unit is that nobody asks questions. You can show up at 3 a.m. with a car full of boxes and a broken heart, and the only person you'll see is the guy on the grainy security monitor. At least, that's what I thought until I met the woman in Unit 217. My life had imploded in the spectacular, yet agonizingly slow-motion way that only a 5-year relationship can. One day you're debating paint colors for the living room, the next you're dividing up a decade's worth of shared memories and Target furniture. Sarah, my now ex, was moving into a tiny, pre-furnished apartment across town and didn't have space for most of her life. So I did what any semi-decent, emotionally wrecked ex-boyfriend would do. I offered to store her stuff until she figured things out. That's how I ended up at Secure Store, a soulless, beige and orange fortress of corrugated metal doors, at all hours of the night. My unit, number 219, was on the second floor, down a long, echoing hallway lit by buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and green. The place was a concrete tomb, filled with the ghosts of other people's lives. Old couches that had seen too many movie nights, boxes of baby clothes from kids now in college, forgotten wedding presents. During my first few trips, I was the only living soul there, my footsteps bouncing off the walls, the scrape of a box on the concrete floor sounding like a gunshot. It was a lonely, pathetic ritual. I'd haul another load of Sarah's life, her books, her ridiculously large collection of scented candles, her winter clothes that still smelled faintly of her perfume, and shove it into the 10 by 10 space. Each box felt like a stone I was placing on the grave of our relationship. I started going later and later, partly because I couldn't sleep, and partly because I didn't want to run into anyone. The quiet desolation of the place matched my mood. That's when I first saw her. I was wrestling with a particularly awkward floor lamp around 2 in the morning when I heard the low, metallic rumble of another unit door rolling up. It was so unexpected that I froze, my heart giving a nervous little flutter. Down the hall, just one unit over from mine, a woman was standing in the doorway of Unit 217. She was maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back into a severe ponytail. She wore simple, practical clothes, dark jeans, and a plain gray hoodie. I only got a quick glimpse before she stepped inside, but what struck me was her intensity. She moved with a kind of deliberate, focused energy, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. I shrugged it off, finished with my lamp, and drove home, the brief encounter already fading from my mind. But then I saw her again. And again. It seemed like every time I went, no matter the hour, she was there. Her unit door would be open, a sliver of light spilling out into the dim hallway, and she would be inside, moving around. Our interactions were minimal, almost non-existent. A slight nod as I passed, a quiet evening exchanged in the echoing hall. Her name was Meyer, a fact I only learned because I overheard the night manager mention it once when he was doing his rounds. Just you and 217 burning the midnight oil again, huh? He'd said with a tired grin. I just nodded. Meyer never seemed to want to chat. She had this unnerving calmness about her, a stillness that felt out of place in the transient, messy world of a storage facility. She was always neat, always composed. I, on the other hand, was a complete mess. My life felt like the jumble of boxes I was storing. I was sleeping on a friend's couch, working a dead-end graphic design job that paid just enough to cover my half of the rent on an apartment I no longer lived in, and generally feeling like a ship without a rudder. The late-night trips to Secure Store became my therapy. A way to feel like I was doing something, organizing the chaos of my life by literally organizing the physical remnants of it. As the weeks went by, I started to notice things about my nocturnal neighbor, little details that didn't quite add up. For starters, she never seemed to bring anything in or take anything out. My unit was a testament to accumulation, a Tetris game of clutter. Hers, from what I could glimpse as I walked past, seemed sparse, and she was always organizing, meticulously. I'd see her wiping down the inside of her unit, arranging things I couldn't quite make out. It was odd. Who cleans a storage unit? The first real red flag, the thing that pricked the bubble of my self-absorbed misery and made a cold trickle of unease run down my spine, was the smell. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. The days were blurring together. It was almost 4 a.m., and I was making what I promised myself would be the last trip. As I got off the industrial elevator and started down the hall, I noticed it. A sharp, chemical scent, like bleach or some heavy-duty industrial cleaner, so strong it made my eyes water. It was coming from her unit. Unit 217. The door was closed, but the smell was seeping out from under it, potent and jarringly out of place. It wasn't the musty, dusty smell of old belongings. It was sterile, astringent, the smell of something being scrubbed clean. And then, beneath the chemical tang, I heard a faint, rhythmic sound. A scraping, or a scrubbing. A methodical, relentless noise that went on, lost in the hum of the building's ventilation. I stood there for a full minute, just listening, the last box of Sarah's kitchenware suddenly feeling 10 times heavier in my arms. A weird, cold dread started to bloom in my chest. What in the world was she doing in there? After that night, my perception of the storage facility and of Meyer began to shift. The quiet, echoing hallways no longer felt lonely, they felt predatory. Every creak of the building, every distant rumble of traffic seemed to carry a new, sinister weight. My late-night visits, once a sad form of solace, now felt charged with a low-grade, humming anxiety. I started paying more attention. I'd find excuses to linger, to make an extra trip back to my car, just to see what was going on with Unit 217. It became a morbid sort of obsession, a distraction from the wreckage of my own life. The strangeness only deepened. I confirmed my earlier suspicion in the dozen or so times I saw her after the bleach incident. Not once did I see her with a box, a piece of furniture, or anything you'd typically associate with a storage unit. Her hands were always empty as she entered and exited. Her car, a nondescript dark blue sedan, was always parked in the most remote corner of the lot, away from the security cameras and the main entrance. She was a creature of the shadows, flitting in and out of the facility with an eerie efficiency. The brief, polite nods we once exchanged ceased. Now, when she saw me, her eyes, which I realized were a very dark, flat brown, would hold mine for a fraction of a second too long. There was no warmth in her gaze, no neighborly recognition. It was a look of pure assessment, cold and analytical, like I was a problem she was quietly figuring out how to solve. The feeling of being watched was immense. I'd be inside my unit, sorting through a box of old photos, and the hair on the back of my neck would stand up. I'd peer out into the long, empty hallway, and she would be there, standing by her unit, just watching me. When our eyes met, she wouldn't even flinch. She'd just slowly, deliberately turn and go back inside, pulling the metal door down with a deafening, final-sounding clang. The sounds from her unit became more frequent and more unsettling. It wasn't just the scrubbing anymore. Sometimes I'd hear a dull, rhythmic thudding, It was a heavy, dense sound, like someone hitting a mattress with a baseball bat. It would go on for 10 minutes, then stop as abruptly as it began. Other times, there was a faint whirring noise, like some sort of power tool, but muffled and distant. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was a carpenter, an artist working on some bizarre project. Maybe she was refinishing furniture. But the explanations all felt thin, flimsy excuses my brain was manufacturing to keep the real, terrifying possibilities at bay. The sterile, chemical smell was a recurring theme, sometimes overpowering, sometimes just a faint, lingering trace in the air, a ghost of sanitation. One night, the smell was so acrid it burned my nostrils. I saw her leaving as I was arriving, and she was carrying a heavy-duty black trash bag, the kind contractors use. It was lumpy and seemed to be leaking a dark, viscous fluid onto the concrete floor. She didn't notice me as she heaved it into the trunk of her car, but I saw the dark stain it left behind on the pavement before she sped off into the night. My own problems seemed to shrink in comparison to the growing dread I felt about the woman in 217. The breakup, the couch surfing, the dead-end job, it was all just background noise to the symphony of wrongness happening just a few feet away from me. I started having nightmares. Dreams of long, empty hallways and the sound of scrubbing that I couldn't wake up from. I knew, on a primal level, that I should stay away, that I should just finish my business, lock up my unit, and never come back after dark. But I couldn't. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I was horrified, but I couldn't look away. I felt a bizarre, terrifying sense of responsibility. What if something truly awful was happening? The crucial discovery, the moment that tipped the scales from creepy neighbor to potential waking nightmare, happened on a rainy Thursday night. I had to retrieve a box of financial documents for Sarah, an urgent request that had me driving to secure store in a downpour around midnight. The place was even more oppressive in the rain, the sound of water drumming on the metal roof adding to the funereal atmosphere. As I expected, Meyer's sedan was in its usual spot. I grabbed the box, my mind solely focused on getting in and out as quickly as possible. As I locked my unit, I heard her door slam shut. I glanced over and saw her walking towards the elevator, her back to me. She was moving quickly, and as she passed under one of the flickering fluorescent lights, something fell from her pocket. It was small and metallic, and it made a tiny, tinkling sound as it hit the concrete floor. She didn't seem to notice. She just kept walking, jabbed the button for the elevator, and disappeared inside. I waited until I heard the elevator machinery grind to a halt on the ground floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Curiosity, that fatal human impulse, got the better of me. I walked over to where she had been standing, my sneakers squeaking on the damp floor. There, lying right in front of her unit, was a single earring. It was a delicate, silver hoop with a small, distinctive turquoise bead. I recognized it instantly. Not because I had ever seen Meyer wear it, but because I had seen it on a poster stapled to a telephone pole just a few blocks from my friend's apartment. A missing person poster. A local barista named Chloe, who had vanished without a trace a week earlier. The photo on the poster showed her smiling, and dangling from her ear was this exact earring. My blood went cold. It was the kind of visceral, body-hijacking fear that starts in your stomach and spreads like ice through your veins. I stood there, frozen, staring at the earring. The silver hoop and the little turquoise bead seemed to glow under the sickly green light of the hallway. It was so small, so innocuous, yet it felt like a bomb had just gone off in front of me. All the weirdness, all the red flags, the late hours, The lack of boxes, the scrubbing, the chemical smells, the thudding sounds snapped into a horrifying, coherent picture. This wasn't just a creepy neighbor with some strange hobby. This was something else entirely. Something monstrous. My mind raced, trying to find another explanation. A coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe Meyer found it somewhere. Maybe she bought a similar one. But my gut, the same gut I'd been trying to ignore for weeks, was screaming at me. There are no coincidences like this. My first instinct was to run, to get out of that building, drive away, and never look back. Forget Sarah's stuff. Forget the deposit on the unit. Just disappear. But my feet felt like they were bolted to the concrete floor. My gaze was fixed on the metal door of Unit 217. What was behind it? The question pulsed in my head, a terrifying drumbeat. I had to know. Or maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe knowing was the worst thing that could happen. I looked up and down the empty hallway. The security camera at the far end, a black dome on the ceiling, suddenly felt like a malevolent, unblinking eye. Was it even recording? Did the night manager actually watch the feeds, or did they just loop old footage? I was completely, utterly alone. Just me, the earring, and whatever terrible secret lay behind that orange door. My hand was shaking as I pulled out my phone. I took a picture of the earring, the focus blurring in and out with a tremor of my fear. Then, on pure, idiotic impulse, I bent down and picked it up. The metal was cold against my clammy skin. I shoved it deep into my pocket, the little bead a hard, damning lump against my thigh. Possessing it felt like a crime in itself. I was now a part of this, a witness. That thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. She would be back. She had to come back for it, didn't she? Or maybe she wouldn't even notice it was gone until it was too late. I had to get out of there. Now, I practically sprinted to the elevator, my footsteps echoing like a frantic drum solo. The ride down felt like an eternity. Every groan and shudder of the machinery was the sound of her coming back, of her finding me. I made it to my car, my lungs burning, the rain soaking through my jacket. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers clumsy and useless. As I finally jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life, my headlights cut through the deluge and illuminated the parking lot. And that's when I saw her. Her blue sedan wasn't gone. It was still parked in its usual spot in the far corner. She hadn't left the building. My heart stopped. She must have taken the stairs. Was she watching me from a window? Did she see me pick up the earring? I slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing on the wet asphalt, and peeled out of the parking lot. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Back at my friend's apartment, I couldn't sit still. I paced the living room, the earring a toxic weight in my pocket. I pulled up the news article about the missing barrister, Chloe. The police were asking for any information. The article included a photo of her, smiling, wearing the earrings. Plural. There were two of them. My blood ran cold again. I had one. Where was the other? Was it with her? The circumstantial evidence was piling up into a mountain of terror. A quiet, secretive neighbor. A unit that smelled like a crime scene being scrubbed clean. And now, a piece of jewelry belonging to a missing person, found right at her doorstep. But what was it, really? A collection of terrifying clues, yes, but no concrete proof. If I went to the police, what would I say? My neighbor at my storage unit is creepy, and I found an earring that looks like one a missing woman was wearing. They would think I was a crackpot. Or worse, what if they investigated and found nothing? Meyer would know it was me, and I'd be left alone with a potential killer knowing who I am and where to find me. The conflict tore me apart. Trust my gut and risk everything, or try to find more proof myself and risk my life. I was at my lowest point, terrified and isolated, with the horrifying knowledge that a predator was operating just a few feet away from where I stored my ex-girlfriend's scented candles, and I was the only person in the world who knew. I spent the next 24 hours in a state of paranoid paralysis. Every shadow looked like her. Every passing car was her dark blue sedan. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The earring sat on the coffee table, a tiny silver and turquoise accusation. The image of Meyer's cold, assessing stare was burned into my mind. What was she capable of? The thudding sounds, the contractor bags my imagination filled in the gruesome blanks. I knew I couldn't go to the police with just an earring and a bad feeling. They'd dismiss it. I needed something more, something undeniable, and there was only one way to get it. The thought was insane, a direct violation of every self-preservation instinct I had. I had to see inside her unit. My plan, if you could even call it that, was born of desperation and fueled by cheap coffee. The storage facility had a weak point. The dividing walls between the units were just corrugated sheet metal bolted onto a steel frame. At the top, near the ceiling, there was a gap of about a foot, covered by a wire mesh to stop people from just climbing over. If I could get high enough in my own unit, I could maybe peer over that mesh and into hers. It was a stupid, reckless idea, the kind of thing that gets the main character killed in the first act of a horror movie. But the alternative, doing nothing while a woman was potentially dead or dying a few feet away, was unthinkable. I waited until after 2 a.m. the following night. I drove to a 24-hour hardware store and bought a small, powerful flashlight and a pair of bolt cutters, the weight of them in the plastic bag feeling illicit and heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break them. Driving to secure store felt like a death row inmate's final journey. Her car wasn't there. A small, fleeting wave of relief washed over me. This was my chance. I got into my unit, the familiar scent of Sarah's candles and old books now laced with a metallic tang of my own fear. I locked the door from the inside, a flimsy piece of security that did nothing to calm my nerves. I began stacking boxes and furniture, creating a rickety, unstable pyramid. A tower of memories I could climb to peek into a nightmare. It was harder than I thought. A wobbly stack of boxes is not a ladder. I fell twice, sending cascades of paperbacks and kitchen utensils crashing to the floor, the noise deafening in the silence. Each time, I froze, listening, expecting to hear her car pull up, her footsteps in the hall. But there was nothing. Finally, I had a platform high enough. I perched precariously on a wobbly chest of drawers, my head nearly touching the ceiling. I switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dusty air. I reached up with the bolt cutters. The wire mesh was thicker than I expected. It took every ounce of my strength, my muscles screaming in protest, to snip a small hole in the mesh just big enough to see through. The snap of the wire was like a gunshot. I paused, listening. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I put my eye to the hole, shining the flashlight's beam into the darkness of Unit 217. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't a storage unit. There were no boxes, no furniture, no ghosts of a former life. The concrete floor was bare, and it was immaculately clean, almost unnaturally so. But there were faint, dark stains that had soaked into the porous concrete, stains that no amount of bleach could ever fully erase. The walls weren't corrugated metal. They had been covered, from floor to ceiling, with thick gray soundproofing foam. In the center of the room was a single, heavy-duty metal table. Bolted to the floor next to it was a large, industrial-looking drain, the kind you'd see in a butcher's shop. A long rubber hose was coiled neatly on the wall. This wasn't a storage unit. It was a kill room, a sterile, soundproofed chamber designed for one horrifying purpose. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I almost fell off my perch. Bile rose in my throat. This was real. My worst fears hadn't even come close to the sterile, methodical horror of this place. I scrambled down from my tower of boxes, my limbs shaking uncontrollably. I had my proof. I had to call the police. Right now. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slipping on the screen. As I was about to dial 911, I heard it. The low rumble of the elevator. My blood turned to ice. She was back. I was trapped. The main door to my unit was locked from the inside. She would know I was in here. I killed the flashlight and plunged myself into darkness, pressing my body against the cold metal wall, trying to make myself smaller. I heard her footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the hall. They stopped right outside my unit. Then a soft, metallic click. She was trying the handle on Unit 219. My unit. A guttural, terrified sound escaped my lips. She knew. She must have seen my car. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then I heard a new sound. A jangling. Keys. She was trying keys on my lock. My mind screamed. How did she have keys to my unit? Was she in league with a night manager? Had she picked the lock before? The lock clicked. My heart stopped. The heavy metal door began to roll upwards, slowly, agonizingly, flooding the unit with the sickly green light of the hallway. And there she was. Meyer, a silhouette of pure menace. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. In her hand, she held a long, thin object that glinted under the lights. It took me a second to realize what it was. A scalpel. I knew you were too curious for your own good, she said, her voice quiet, devoid of any emotion. It was the calmest, most terrifying sound I had ever heard. That's when my survival instinct, an animalistic panic I never knew I possessed, took over. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a heavy, metal desk lamp of Sarah's, and I threw it at her with everything I had. It hit her in the shoulder with a sickening thud, making her stumble back a step. It was all the time I needed. I launched myself out of the unit, past her, and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, my legs pumping, my lungs on fire, the sounds of her footsteps pounding on the concrete behind me. I burst through the fire exit, setting off a blaring alarm, and sprinted into the rainy night, not stopping until the sound of the alarm was a distant echo. The police found her an hour later, sitting calmly in her open unit, wiping down the metal table. The evidence was overwhelming. They found Chloe's DNA in the drain, along with evidence of at least 2 other missing women from the area. My testimony, the earring, and the bolt cutters I'd left behind in my unit painted the full picture. She was a monster, hiding in plain sight, using the anonymous, transient nature of a 24-hour storage facility to commit unspeakable acts. It's been a few years since that night. I got my life back together in a way. I have my own apartment now, a better job. I even started dating again. But I'm not the same person. I can't be in quiet, empty places. I can't stand the smell of bleach. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is asleep, I think about Meyer. I think about her unnerving calm, her methodical efficiency, and the cold, flat emptiness in her eyes. I saved a life that night, maybe more. But I'm left with a chilling knowledge of what can lurk just beneath the surface of the mundane world, behind a simple, unassuming orange door in a place where nobody asks questions. And I have to wonder how many other doors like that are out there. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.